Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody and open the meeting for any public comment. Anybody wish to speak? Either that means we're doing everything wrong or doing everything right, I'm not sure.
Don't
Okay.
ask.
Right.
Don't ask, right. Everybody's received a copy of the minutes.
May be approved.
Motion by Gary to approve. Do I have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Chairman's report. Really no report other than I think that I was impressed with the results of the meeting of the legislative bodies, and also I felt I attended the, as did most everybody here, attended the forum last Thursday, and that I think also went extremely well. And Mark and the team, the crew, I thought did a good job. Other than that, I don't have any comment. I'll turn it over to Mark.
Okay, thank you very much. You have all of the progress reports from the various departments. I would call your attention over to the marketing report. And this is not Michael's fault, this is my fault. We refer to the fact that we have signed a lease with Wood Group, and we have. They have decided to lease an additional 32,000 square feet. However, in particular for Jim and my other friends in the media, Wood Group has asked us not to speculate about the number of jobs that will be created. So the reference in there to the number of new jobs being created should be deleted, if you could, from your report. And I would ask that if any members of the media have questions as to how many jobs will be created as a result of this expansion, that they be directed directly to corporate headquarters at Wood Group. Denny Doyle will be glad to provide any or all of you with the phone numbers. But this is good news. This is an expansion of one of our original tenants, an extra 32,000 square feet. They will be going from jet engine testing to jet engine repairs, and we're very, very pleased to have them on board. But again, any speculation on the number of jobs has to be done by the company, not by PARC. Secondly, I want to just pass it around real quickly. We got a rather nice thank you note, and I know these are trivial, but they're important to us here, and I think to you too, about PARC sponsorship in newspapers and education program. Just wanted to pass that around. Also, give you a quick update on where we sit with the authority legislation. As Randy mentioned earlier, we had the second of two meetings with all of the local elected officials. I was in Washington at the time, and I think the meeting went so well that I should leave town more often. They made a great deal of progress, and the exact situation right now is that PARC is busy trying to get all of the agreements that were made that night incorporated into what we believe will be the fourth and hopefully final draft of the legislation. We have promised the county attorney, the town and the city attorneys a disc with the entire legislation on it. There will be a meeting with their attorneys and our attorney probably as early as this week, and we'll get this thing in the form where the folks in Albany can turn it into what looks like a piece of legislation, and then we will impose upon Senator Stafford and Chris Ortloff to have the bill introduced as early as possible. My best guess is that by the time we finish with the word crafting and wordsmithing and Albany's finished, that the earliest we would see it introduced is sometime in the month of April. In fact, I spoke with Chris Ortloff last week, and he indicated that they were definitely still on track to at least introduce the legislation. What happens to it after that is anybody's speculation. Clearly, as we have said all along, the real battle is going to be fought in Albany, and I wouldn't presume to second guess how the senator or the assembly are going to handle this. But you know, we've had a great distraction here talking about the local politics and getting the local governments to agree, and that was no easy task, and credit goes to Clyde Rabideau and Andy Abdallah, and especially Don Garrett for getting that whole thing moving forward. But with all due respect to the locals, now we've got the real battle. This is a state law, it can only be decided by state legislators, so we'll just have to wait and see. And it's also clear that one of our concerns has now become a reality. The positioning and the negotiations for the budget have already begun, as I'm sure Gail knows. Our bill's right in the middle of all that, and so we'll have to simply wait and see.
Mark,
I'm
hasn't
sorry.
the attorneys met, didn't they meet last Friday? The
No.
three attorneys, weren't they supposed to meet
No,
last Friday?
they did not meet. They were thinking about it,
Oh, I
but that did
thought so.
not happen. I think in part because just the physical act of getting that legislation revised to reflect all those changes. Dennis Curtin had originally proposed that they each take like 1/3 of the bill and rework it. And I talked to Dennis, and we decided it would be a lot less clumsy if we just did as much of it as we could, and then the four of us marked it up, one whole bill, one paragraph at a time. And I have to say, they've been very good about that. And park staff, particularly Jackie and our attorney, have been very good about getting this bill reworked. Every time somebody makes a suggestion, we throw it in there. And they seem fairly pleased. But we have some more work. Hopefully that'll be done this week, and then we'll be off and running. Along those lines, I was in Washington, as you know, last Monday and Tuesday, and we covered a bunch of items having to do with PARC, not the least of which was the authority, and we were able to reinforce the earlier agreement that we had made verbally with Al Lois, the director of the BCA, and that is that when this legislation is actually introduced, all of the rents on the public benefit transfer portion of the base, which is essentially most of our rents, will be reduced to zero. That represents a savings of more than $30,000 a month. And in very short order, that figure will climb by thousands more because of the new leases that we're signing. So we're anxiously awaiting introduction of the bill, and it was nice to be able to go to Washington and confirm that. We also talked in Washington about our business plan for the transfer, both the public benefit transfer and the economic development conveyance. And we were able to show them the pieces that we have put together, and we were told that's exactly what they wanted. They were very pleased with what they saw. And we also came to an agreement on some of our previous rents and previous utilities. But because that is still pending, I'd like to withhold public discussion on that, and I'll give you a fuller report later on. And finally, we're talking to them also about our central heat plant. And we gave them our initial numbers on that, and I think we were able to demonstrate that they would save a lot of money if they gave a payout check to us. But they've taken those numbers and they want some time to analyze them. There'll be another meeting, probably in another week or two, at least a conference call to discuss that. So, we also had a couple of interesting meetings in the past couple of weeks since our last get-together. One of them was with the Westinghouse Air Brake Company. We finally got to meet the new boss, John Meister, very nice man. And we also talked about their plans. They have operations in Chicago and Montreal, and of course now here. We covered their plans for this particular building, and Westinghouse Air Brake is turning into, well, I guess we knew it when they arrived, but it's certainly a first-class tenant, and they seem very, very pleased with the way both our marketing department and our tenant services department have been dealing with them. We have had 2 get-togethers with potential contractors for the construction of our webpage. I attended one. Julie went to the last one, I think, on Friday. I assumed it went well. We'll be in a position soon to recommend that a contract be drawn up with one of them. And I would, again, invite any of you that want to participate in any of this to let me know, particularly as we get into the details about constructing PARC's webpage. It will be state-of-the-art. It will be, with all due respect to the Chamber, one of the best in the North Country. Can't wait for you to see it.
One of the best?
One of the best. I was going to say the best, but I didn't want to get Gary really upset. So, one of the best. And as you know, we had a public forum just last week. Some of you were there. Thank you for attending. Not a large crowd, but I think a very supportive crowd. And I think a lot of people share our relief that at least the local controversy and discussions have ended, and now all eyes are in Albany. We will continue to have forums like that, but we won't be scheduled to have another one for at least another 3 months or so. If you have suggestions in that regard, let me know. Also, I would like to announce that, and Dan's going to be with us right through the executive session today, that I have asked Dan Winnicke, our Vice President, to take direct responsibility for our Special Projects Department. This is probably one of the most significant tasks at PARC this year, because it involves, over the next 18 to 24 months, more than $13 million in renovations and new construction. And he and Eric Day, who's running a little bit late today, I'm told, will be in charge of that entire aspect of PARC's operation. It's a tremendous responsibility, but I'd like to say publicly, and we can pull it off, it's Dan Winnicke. He's been doing a great job, and we really appreciate it, Dan. What PARC did not do a great job at is the literacy challenge. If any of you were embarrassed by our performance, we apologize. We got knocked out by a genius doctor at CVPH Medical Center, but PARC was represented at the literacy challenge. And I believe, other than what questions you may have on the various reports, that is all that I have. However, I have very quickly 5 pending leases, and so I need an executive session to talk about pending real estate matters, and I have 1 personnel matter that I'd like to talk to you all about in executive session. So I'll need an executive session.
Okay. Any questions of Mark?
And Mark, could you just share with us information relative to the ramp down and the creation of the authority?
Sure.
Those 2 things line up.
The timing here is getting a bit difficult to contemplate. My plan has been and continues to be that the discussions about a ramp down would formally, well, they've already begun, but we would really push hard the minute the legislation was introduced. We don't have a tremendous amount of credibility in Washington with respect to our effort to become an authority until that legislation is introduced. They are aware of the fact, acutely aware of the fact, that once it's introduced, it's got to come out the other end. It's either going to be voted up or down. They take that to mean that we're on our way. So the ramp down discussions, along with the business plan and negotiations for the PBT and the EDC, because remember, you don't get the economic development conveyance for free. You got to ask for it, and you got to argue for it. All those commence very officially and very formally with the advent of the introduction of the legislation. Ideally, this would all come to a head at the same time. So the legislation would take effect 1/1/99. The ramp down, if it wasn't in writing by then, would be effective as of 1/1/99. The decision on the central heat plant would come earlier, but the PBT and the EDC, the record of decision, all of that would be all effective 1/1/99. Now, the timing here could be thrown off if the legislation gets mired down in Albany, but we have to proceed as if it's going to come out on time. So literally, the next couple of weeks, I'll probably be back in Washington to put all of that to bed. The discussion of the ramp down occurred again when I was in Washington this past week. They are reminding me that, yes, they've done one. It was Loring Air Force Base. They do not feel that we are as rural as Loring Air Force Base, and I think there's some truth to that. On the other hand, we are arguing that unlike most bases in the country, we have been denied any federal presence whatsoever. And that fact, combined with the fact that we are rural, but happen to be close to Montreal, we require extra assistance. The board and the public at large have to know, however, that when it's all is said and done, we can project our revenue, we can project our expenses. In my opinion, there has been and there continues to be a significant gap between the income that we're projecting and the expenses we're going to incur. That gap is the ramp down. And if we don't get the ramp down, I think the park, whether it's an authority or not, would get off to a very rocky start financially. And so that's when this whole thing comes down to. And you should take that very, very seriously. At our next work session, based on the meeting that we just had in Washington, we'll be able to show you the essential components of the business plan, and you can take a look at the numbers yourself, and you'll see how we calculated the ramp down discussion. It's a long-winded answer, Gil, I apologize.
No, I appreciate that because the question has come up several times. And I have another question, but Hank, you go ahead.
Henry, go ahead.
The question that keeps resurfacing, and you've answered it many times, but I wish you'd just answer one more time. And the question is, when we become an authority, and if the authority was not successful based upon the ramp down and other issues, what becomes the obligation to the city, town, and county financially?
Sure.
You've answered it several times, but it seems to keep resurfacing. So
It's a good
I wish
question,
you'd address it.
and it's on the minds, and it's a concern of many of the taxpayers, and I know these board members, and justifiably so. Early on in our discussions, in fact, I think it was the first time we went in front of the county, the freshman legislator, George Rabideau, made the suggestion that although it was clear in the law that because the authority would be a separate entity and none of its financial obligations could be imposed upon the local taxing jurisdictions or even the local taxpayers, that he wanted something in the legislation. And so right now, this third, soon-to-be fourth draft of the legislation does contain a clause, and this would be state law, that says that nothing in the legislation can be interpreted to mean that either the county or the town or the city can be made or are or at any time will become financially liable or otherwise liable for the actions, activities, commissions, or whatever of PARC. That's as tight as you can make it. It's a state law, and I think it would withstand any court challenge. And the purpose is very simple. We do not ever want to position PARC such that local taxpayers could someday wake up and discover that they are financially liable for either the environmental or the legal implications of operating this agency. And this is, I think, the reason the town and city and village fathers and mothers long ago said that whatever entity is going to handle the redevelopment of the air base, it ought to be separate. And I think the reason now that we're on our way to an authority and that neither the county, the town, or the city have stepped up to the plate and says, we'll take care of it for you, because nobody wants the taxpayer's burden. So thanks to Rabideau and others who expressed that concern, it's in the legislation. I have no reason to believe that it's going to change. If anything, it'll be strengthened. And I think the taxpayers, at least for now, can breathe easy that they will not have any of the liability for what's going on out here.
Thank you.
Henry?
Mark, when the figures on the central heating plant are reviewed, who is going to be making the final decision on what's to be done?
The final decision will be the Secretary of the Air Force. They have to decide, and it was from his office that the original decision was made about central heat plants. It's very simple numbers. Let's say, for example, our central heat plant costs $1 million a year to run. It actually costs about $1.6 million. They are obligated right now, at a minimum, to keep paying for that for 2 more years. So let's say the cost is $3.2 million. What this boat rights memo issued back in '94 says is that we would consider giving you 80% of that amount, up to 80% of that amount, if you'll just go away. And the theory is that we would take the 80%, in this case, 80% of $3.2 million, about $2.6 million, and invest it in individual heating systems. And that if we could use that money to pay fuel and get the individual heating systems up and running, we would eventually get to that point where our tenants could pay their own heat bill. Because right now, because we are central heating, we can't bill the heat individually. It's part of the rent in many cases. We've run those numbers, and we think that the Air Force could save almost $2/3 of $1 million by giving us a rather large check now, rather than just keep paying our costs month to month. They're looking at those numbers. We think also that while it won't be enough to keep us in fuel and in heating, individual heating systems for years and years and years, it'll keep us going for as many as 3 years. And by that point, many of my leases can be modified, and the tenants can pick up the burden.
What concerns me a bit is the conversion expense. Will they give us enough money to convert?
Well, right now,
Face that expense.
if you go by $1.6 million per year, and you take, just doing this quickly, we would get a check for about $2.5 million, if we got the maximum 80%, and if it only went out 2 years. I think $2.5 million would barely cover the cost of the individual heating systems. If it would cover
the
it
present
all.
lease buildings, or? Or-
Well, most of them. For example, I would not recommend that we continue to heat the housing units. I would look very strongly at whether or not we should continue to heat the base hospital. There are 3 dorms that we're currently heating that I would reconsider heating if this were my fuel.
No, but
expense.
eventually, if those are converted into useful pieces of property, they'll have to have their own heating system,
Exactly.
and that should be
We
taken into
and we will have to decide whether the federal amount that we get, if we get it, plus state funds, because we budgeted some of our state funds for this year for that, and we haven't got those state funds
No,
secured
right.
either. We'll have to decide where it's best spent.
Well, that's why I think we ought to have some say in what direction.
But
we
what
go.
I will do,
And
this
not
is,
be dictated
this
to.
is part of the ramp down, of course. The board will see these numbers. You've seen some of them already, but you can see even more detail as we get into the ramp down. But I have to tell you honestly, Henry, it's their decision as to A, whether or not any amount's going to be paid out, and B, how much they're going to pay out. Their obligation is only to do the caretaker for about 2 more years, and then that's it.
How's our congressman, is he doing anything? Is he meet with you down there in Washington when you're meeting with these Air Force people, or where is he?
On this last trip, we did not request their presence, either John's presence or Carrie Beck. I have to tell you that they have been extremely responsive when we need them. We only call them in when we absolutely need them. These are all preliminary meetings. The final showdown, I'm sure that John himself will be there because we're going to want him there, and possibly somebody from Senator DeMaro's office.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah, and I'm sure I was going to actually mention that. That was one of the couple of things that the senator pledged himself to be there when we call upon him to help with. is to
Senator
get-
D'Amato.
Is to get the ramp down approved
Yep.
on terms that we needed to be approved on.
I will tell you, too, I think this is now a matter of public record, that one of our friends in Washington will be leaving. Assistant Secretary Coleman will be going into the private sector. I'm told, the next 30 to 45 days. He was a friend at the highest possible level in the Air Force. We're going to stay on track, of course, but we're sad to see him go. He was very, very helpful and very responsive to PARC.
Any other questions? Okay, committee reports. Henry, do you have a committee of finance, please?
The Finance Committee had a meeting on this past Thursday, and in attendance was Mark and Dan and Julie, Lee, Gil Dukin, and myself. The meeting lasted for about an hour and a half, and during the meeting we reviewed the accounts payable and also discussed the 1998 budget formulation statement. Also, we were presented with an excellent income and expense statement designed by Julie to give us a better review and understanding of Park's finances instead of the cumbersome and confusing budget statement that we have to try and trudge through. Also, tomorrow, we're going to be having a preliminary draft meeting with Bob Frenier from Abbott, Frenier, Russell and Coffey Accountants Firm, which will present the the draft report of our 1997 audit. And from everything that I hear and been told, our finances couldn't be in better shape due to Parks Finance Department's sound financial practices. And I would like to personally thank Julie and Lee for the fine job they're doing and to make these things happen. That's it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any questions of Henry?
Board, Hank?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other committee reports? I don't believe. Old business. Anybody have any old business they want to bring up? How about new business? Anybody got new business? Okay. I'll open back up for public comments. Anybody from the public wish to ask questions or make a comment?
The motion to go into executive session on leasing and personnel matters.
I have a motion from Gary to go to executive session for leasing and personnel.
I'll second.
Second by Marion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Fine.
Opposed? Abstained? So move, and we'll take a 10-minute break.
Mark and Hank.